Bună dimineața și bun găsit la BU. Sunt Sabina Iosub și vă invit să rămâneți alături de mine în următoarea jumătate de oră, căci o să discutăm despre planurile Uniunii Europene privind energia. Today, here with me in the European Parliament in Brussels is Christian Eller. Thank you so much for your presence.
Pleasure.
We will discuss about two important topics, Repower EU and Fit for 55. Let's start with the second one because we just had a decision in the plenary regarding part of this huge program, Fit for 55. What happened?
There's a fraction of realists beyond the parties who want to achieve the climate reduction or the CO2 reduction ambition, but still wants to survive the European industry. And I think what we want to have is a decarbonization, but not a deindustrialization. And that majority won practically all the votes. It was cross-party. But then in the end, the left and the far right got nervous. The far right because they principally vote against everything in Europe, and the left because they didn't fulfill their ambitions. So that strange coalition, which I, in 18 years, have never seen before, killed a voting which was so far very successful for the European economy and the climate.
What will be the effect for all of us?
Let's see. I think what we tried to do in these weeks to find a compromise, to stay with the votes we had, which was a realistic vote, which adopted the Commission proposals to the reality of Corona, a post-Corona economic crisis, the crisis, energy crisis we have with Russia, the war practically, indirectly we have with Russia. And so I think there's a lot of pressure now on the left that on the one hand they wanted to vote against, but on the other hand there's a lot of backing from unions, from the industry to find a compromise which is not far away from the votes we had before.
What will be the final effect after everything is decided over here in the European Parliament, after the trilogue? What will be in the European states the difference for the next years?
I think what we're voting is of transformative nature. I mean, we're going to change our economy. We're going to change partly the way we live, where we live. It is, on the one hand, a big chance because in terms of the European economy, we would be world leading in environmental technologies. So I think it's a big chance for many industries. On the other hand, it's a challenge. If you have a house, you have to refurbish your heating system. If you have a car, you have to consider whether e-mobility is an option for you. If you are community level, you have to do something for your public buildings. So it's really literally of transformative nature.
It's also a change in the mentality of the Europeans. I think it's very important to see this and to work for this change.
Definitely. I mean, we are driven, and rightly so, by a young generation which fears about their future. Realistically, their parents also fear a little bit about their jobs and whether they're able to invest in that kind of measure, whether it's on housing, on their cars, on mobility. So I think we're addressing a European population by saying we have to change. But on the other hand, we don't want to change so radically that you can't speed up. And I think that's the important compromise we have to find, that we are addressing the needs, but also we have a realistic perspective what people can put as burdens on their shoulders.
Will there be enough money for this?
There will be enough money. I mean, we have already the InvestEU program of 700 billion, where more or less the bulk of the money goes in innovation, renovation, in infrastructure questions. But still, there is a lot to bear. And the investments in energy infrastructure, in a more integrated energy markets, that is not yet decided on how we are going to finance that.
Let's go to the next subject, Repower EU. We will see in the near future, let's hope, a cutting in the dependency on Russia's energy, all types of energy. What are the solutions, actually?
I mean, first of all, it's a deepening of the European energy market. I mean, that sounds so theoretical, but in practical terms, if we, in a shorter perspective, we can just substitute Russian gas by LNG gas. But the capacity to get LNG gas wherever we buy it in the world, to get it on land, is in Spain. But there's not a connection between Spain and France or Central or Eastern Europe. So realistically, the shortcomings even to substitute Russian gas might not so much on LNG gas or alternative sources. It might be the lack of infrastructure in Europe. So more of a deepening, a more interconnected infrastructure, more storage capacities for emergency, and a regime. Let's be honest, if we get in a critical phase and Russia completely shuts down the gas supply and we get in a more confrontational situation, we have to have a regime, so which industry we are bringing down in order to hold up the energy supply for private households.
What is the dependency of Germany to Russia's gas? Because I know it's kind of big.
It is relatively robust. We depend roughly 35 to 40% of our energy sources come from Russia. We might be able to substitute for a while because we have a lot of storage in Germany. But for my constituency, for example, in Eastern Germany, it means, for example, that we're seeking now for a solution for having fuel supply for the Berlin airport. So for the very moment, if Russia would cut down, for example, or we would decide from our side to cut down the supply for oil, we wouldn't have a solution to have fuel on the Berlin airport. So that is the dramatic situation. On the other hand, we have a relatively developed economy, so we might be able to adapt. But this is a crisis situation, not much less.
Is Repower EU too ambitious?
The question is a little bit if it's just the Commission suggesting more of the same. And I think to some extent we really have to have a look whether things are realistic. I mean, we are looking very much on new ambitions on renewables. We raise it from 40 to 45%. The Commission wants to go higher. The question is not whether it's too ambitious. The question is we are presenting figures, but does the reality or would be the reality to live up to the ambition? And I think there we have to be realistic because it will take some time that we have the needed amount of renewables. And so in a way, personally, I think, yes, it was important to flag. It's important to have a shared effort in Europe, to allocate more money even for the economies where it might be even more of a burden than in strong economies like Germany. But realistically, it's no longer a formulating ambition. It's really about doing things. And I think I'm not so quite sure whether the Repower EU is not more formulating ambitions and less really having the member states on board to engage.
6 packages with sanctions for Russia we've seen till now. What is the effect of those packages?
I mean, the question is short-term, mid-term, long-term. I think short-term there is not so much effect yet. Because, I mean, we all we finance the war in Russia. It's not that our payments go into tanks, because that is not realistic. In the midterm perspective, I think it will shut down a lot of sources, financial sources from Russia to build up or to rebuild their military power. In the longer perspective, 2 things will happen. On the one hand, Russia will be dependent even more on China, and that's somehow threatening because the Chinese will, with open arms, take the raw material resources and the energy resources of Russia. But I think also one aspect is underestimated. It will shut down the carbon economy even more, because if a huge economy, and still the biggest in the world like Europe, is shutting down the dependencies on carbon, that will be the mega trend in the world. So I think we have to differentiate that. Short term, not much. Mid-term, I think that will sustainably hit the Russian economy. And in the longer perspective, it will build the dependency from Russia towards China.
I think it's important to listen to your message for the European citizens now.
I mean, my message is that what I said, that we should be all realists and we have to change. We owe that to the next generation, but it's no longer about formulating ambitions. It is about what we realistically can do. And realistically, we can't overburden consumers and ordinary citizens. We cannot artificially raise energy prices, but we have to be honest. You know, we have to change our life, the way we lived, that we practically didn't care so much about energy costs, about efficiency, about the next generation renewable. That has to come to an end. We have to develop ambition, but we have to balance that in a way that citizens are not pretty much saying, you're formulating the ambitions and we carry the burden.